Are you tired of your valuable ideas and suggestions getting lost in the shuffle? Well, that is why I'm introducing Direct Suggest, the revolutionary digital suggestion box that puts your voice front and center. With Direct Suggest, you have the power to make a difference in your organization. Direct Suggest provides value to organizations in various industries worldwide, including notable brands like Comcast, TD Bank, and Nokia. And here's the best part. Direct Suggest only costs 50 cents per employee per month, making it an affordable solution for businesses of all sizes. Plus, they have an incredibly high ROI and savings potential with an average 33 times return on investment. The implementation process is also a breeze. Once committed, setting up Direct Suggest from start to finish can be completed in as quickly as a week or less. Don't let your ideas or your team's ideas go unnoticed. Visit directsuggest.com today and start by making a difference with Direct Suggest. Use the promo code HUMANHR for your extended 60-day free trial. Again, visit directsuggest.com to learn more, and remember to use promo code HUMANHR for an extended free trial. Direct Suggest, where your voice matters. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you are catching this episode, and visit my website at hrtracy.com. This week, we are going to be talking about a very hot topic, which is AI and software in HR. And this is a topic that we've talked about at length over the last few months, but I have an even better expert on the podcast to discuss this whole topic and this idea, this concept, everything in between with me. And that guest is Bryan Driscoll. He's an experienced HR consultant and lawyer, and Bryan works with businesses of all sizes, guiding them through today's complex labor laws. With an intimate understanding of the intricacies of employment law, especially in the era of remote work, Bryan ensures that businesses are not just legally compliant, but also places where employees feel valued and take pride in their work. Leveraging his expertise, Bryan has built a successful business that aids other companies in creating work environments that meet their legal obligations and resonate with their employees. His goal is to help create workplaces where legal compliance and employee satisfaction coexist harmoniously. Beyond consulting, Bryan frequently shares his HR insights on various podcasts like mine, offering advice to a wider audience. So I love it. I love that Bryan is with us. Bryan, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, you are going to be in the hot seat for the entire duration of the podcast because you have so much knowledge and so much expertise. I love any chance that we get to bring someone with a law background, especially, a practicing attorney onto the podcast because you just have a depth of knowledge that those of us who are not attorneys don't have. So let's start out with this concept of AI and software in HR. What are some of the, thinking broad strokes here, what are some of the pros and cons or limitations, challenges, and benefits to AI and bringing in this type of software into HR?
So much of AI in HR can be traced back to a lot of automation that we've seen over the last few years. And there is a distinction between automation and AI. Automation, think of things like Indeed, where you can automatically send a test to a candidate. That's an automation, that's not AI. We have progressed now into the realm of AI in HR, where AI does some of the manual review of those tests and will automatically disqualify or qualify candidates. It will scrub resumes and only send to a human reviewer the resumes it deems most qualified. Those are the advancements that we've seen most recently. Those are the advancements that make HR departments of one in small companies or for true small business owners, their job more streamlined, more efficient, more effective. Those exact same things, though, those exact same advancements are the same things that get those companies into trouble. Because right at the top, I want to make sure that the audience knows that the EEOC has made very clear for several years now that when you use AI software in hiring, you are liable. You, the company, are liable. Even if the software is defective, the software has violated a candidate's rights, you, the company that is using the software, you are liable. And that is a big issue that a lot of small businesses specifically, but companies of any size, just don't understand. That they are on the hook for this, even when they're paying somebody else, another software developer or vendor, for this service that they think is compliant, but ends up discriminating against someone in the hiring process or even in the employment process.
That's really helpful. And when you say, when you share the where the burden is, that the liability is on the company, when we think about AI, especially in hiring, it's probably the easiest way for us to think about how AI is influencing businesses and HR. It could be something like, for example, what you said before, weeding out candidates. If the AI software is defective or even not defective, if there is some sort of discrimination happening, it's the company, you're saying, that is then liable and responsible for that.
Exactly. So there's you can be, I refer to it as active and passive discrimination. You can actively discriminate against somebody. You can say, hey, this is a woman candidate. I don't want women working for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can passively discriminate against someone where your hiring practices inadvertently weed out women and you're left with men. And both of those are against EEOC regulations and against federal law. And software, a lot of software has an issue with bias.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because of that bias, some of these issues are still occurring. Some of these sort of passive discrimination is still occurring in businesses, and that will get them in trouble.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Actually, I think I did an episode on this a number of months ago, that even with automation and AI, and really specifically AI in this instance, there still has to be ownership from the individuals and at the company level, whether it's HR, recruiting, et cetera, to ensure that the hiring practices are still compliant. So, with that said, what are some maybe it's really honestly not even basic, but what are some, ground rules for the listeners to keep in mind that keep them compliant, even if they are using an AI software for their hiring practices?
Yeah, it's internal controls. It's having processes, policies, procedures in place for your HR team. Again, whether that's the small business owner, an HR department of one, or a larger HR team, it's having controls in place. Number one, where you know the laws that you're impacted by, and to be clear, in the world of remote work, those laws may be more than what you think at this point. Because if you're a business based in Texas and you only hire employees in Texas, now you need to hire a software developer or something in California. You now, though that California employee, you have to abide by the California laws.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have different laws for different people, different employees depending on where they live and work. So it's all about having the right policies and processes in place to make sure that you are updated on the laws, you're following the laws, and if you're using AI software, that software is also compliant. Many software companies will say, yes, we are EEOC compliant, we have done internal testing, and many companies do. Some companies don't, but many companies do. But again, it's still on the company using the software to ensure compliance. And it sounds redundant, and it is a little bit to a certain extent, but you have to have that internal process in place to sort of review the software to make sure that it is operating in compliance with laws.
Right. It's really helpful. I mean, so many of the listeners, I'm sure, are thinking about the software that they use and whether or not they're kind of just fully like throwing caution to the wind and fully relying on the software, which is very easy to do. I mean, I don't know if you saw this, but it's a little bit, it actually is completely a different topic, but there was an issue where a group of attorneys were leveraging ChatGPT, which I use ChatGPT every day. But unfortunately, these attorneys were citing case laws that they pulled from their ChatGPT research, let's call it. They had asked ChatGPT for information on case laws for a, totally different topic than what we're discussing today. And it turned out that those case laws were non-existent, that they were totally, I don't know if they were fabricated by ChatGPT or what, but it was a good example to me that for how you have to really, you can rely on the technology, but you have to do your due diligence to make sure that you are then, not falling prey to the, oh, well, the technology is, it's got all the answers. It's going to be fine for me and I don't have to worry. So I don't know if you heard about that. That was like a few months ago and I was like rocked by
Yeah,
that.
that was in New York. I did hear about that. Those attorneys are definitely in some trouble at this point. Yes,
Yeah.
all the cases were fabricated, but that's part of the problem with specifically with some of the LLMs is that they hallucinate and they sound convincing. I think that leads to a perfect example too about like what AI can do, because I want to make clear too that I'm not trying to scare people away from using AI software in HR, but you have to have the right controls in place to make sure you're compliant. I think the a perfect example of this is um, years ago now when I was in law school. It was around the time when software like Westlaw and LexisNexis were becoming much more prevalent, and you didn't have to go to the law library and research cases anymore in actual physical books and then find the citations for those cases and then go to a different book and read that case and see if that helped you. You could do searches on West. And a lot of people were concerned that this was going to eliminate attorneys, eliminate paralegals, eliminate a lot of the industry, and it didn't. It made everybody just a little bit more efficient, and it opened up the industry to more people because more people have access to software online than they do to going to a law library. So it actually helped diversify the industry a little bit. But it's analogous to this because it required some shifting of the way that you work. It changed your job. It didn't eliminate your job. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the key takeaway here for AI software and HR, because I'm sure a lot of HR employees are concerned about losing their job to HR or to software, and they shouldn't be. Some companies may say, well, we'll just let software use it. Those are the companies that are probably going to get into the most trouble,
Right.
because they're not going to have anybody to sort of look over the software shoulder. But it's going to change the way you do your job, and it's going to help you be more efficient in the end, even if you are having to look over its shoulder and having to sort of double check some of the steps and make sure that your applicant pool is not, you're not discriminating against the applicant pool and only weeding through and just getting white men
Mm-hmm.
as your bulk of your applicants. But that'll still make your job more efficient, faster, and allow you to focus on other things like employee engagement, and some of those really important aspects of HR that often get tossed to the side, especially as businesses are in rapid growth mode and hire a lot. They can lean on some of this software as long as they're looking over its shoulder.
Right. That's such a great example that it just changes the way that we work. It doesn't replace who is working. And, this is something not only that I read about constantly in newsletters and the news that people are terrified of automation replacing their jobs. There's a document, I guess it's a limited series. It's called on Netflix. It's called Working What We Do in a Day. I don't know if you've watched it yet. And have you
I've
watched
seen
it?
a couple of the
You've
episodes.
seen
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
my husband and I binge watched it. I was like, I'm obsessed. This is amazing. I'm going to do a podcast episode on it. Actually, I don't know. By the time this comes out, either I've already done it or I'm doing it in the future. So we'll see if how much of a time traveler I am. But what's so interesting is that so the executive producers are former President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, and they look into the lives for those of the listeners who haven't necessarily seen this, or maybe you've been cut out by the Netflix, you can't use your parents' Netflix account anymore because you live in a different place. Not that that's me or anything. But they look into the lives of different levels of employees in the workforce. So you have, those who are in the service jobs, those who are in like these mid-level, middle class, so to speak, jobs that are paying incomes that place people in the middle class, so to speak, and then those who are like the top of the food chain in business and the workforce. And it was so fascinating because when looking at or listening to those in the service jobs, of course, you really empathize because they have some difficult challenges that they're confronted with. But one of the very common themes that comes up is this idea that automation is going to replace their jobs and that this is what predicates their involvement in the unions that they're a part of, which you can go either way with that. Unions have certainly had their their time in the sun, and even now we're seeing a lot more union activity. But I share this because not only do I get, I read all of these things in the news, but then I get so much outreach from people, from listeners especially, who are worried that their jobs will be replaced. So I think it's such a fabulous example that you use, because there has been so much progress in the last even 20 years, let alone the last 50 years, that has enabled us to work differently. So for those of you who haven't watched the show yet, you definitely should. It's really fascinating.
Yeah,
It's
I agree. The couple of episodes that my wife and I have watched are great, and I agree with you. There's a lot of those concerns, and I think that, yeah, to be clear, like some jobs will get replaced eventually. Like, you look at the assembly line 100 years ago
right,
with Ford, that was all people doing it. Now it's mostly machines doing it. Yeah, sure, things are going to
right.
eventually get replaced, and people will need to pivot in certain industries. But I think that's just human evolution, and technological evolution. Ideally, maybe one day AI will replace all of us, and we can all just sit on the beach. So I think that's probably outside of our lifetimes, but I think that yeah, for the most part, people just need to understand that it's not going to replace their job, their career. It's going to change how they do it, and I would look at it as a positive, because it's going to allow you to spend more time doing some of the things that you probably want to be doing but don't necessarily have the time for, because you're spending so much time on administrative stuff. And that's where the
hmm
the AI can really help, especially in HR, is some of the administration. Again, looking over its shoulder, but it can really help streamline and make people more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good distinction too. I wonder, I realize that this is not necessarily part of what we plan to discuss today, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on how union activity is influenced, if at all, by automation. Is there any connection between like the rise or the recent, I guess, discussion around union activity in, especially in some larger businesses, compared to this rise and like steadfast progression between AI and automation? If your company is remote or hybrid, then you know just how difficult it can be to grow your company's culture beyond a pre scheduled Zoom happy hour or occasional lunch and learn. Well, this week's sponsor is here to solve that. They're called CultureBot. CultureBot has devised what will likely become the gold standard for growing and blossoming a company culture inside of Slack. The app is like a sidekick for any HR or people professional, automating a lot of the mundane tasks you probably are forgetting to do on a daily basis. Things like birthday and work anniversary celebrations, team shoutouts and kudos, employee introductions, and remote games. It even has health and wellness tips and conversation starters. If that piques your interest, this will get you even more excited. Today, I'm able to share a special promotion for listeners of the podcast. You can get your first 6 months of CultureBot for 50% off. Plus, if your team is under 25 employees, CultureBot is free forever. So if you're looking for a way to create a culture of appreciation and drive increased engagement and togetherness across your team, I definitely recommend checking out CultureBot. Go to getculturebot.com/humanhr. That's getculturebot.com/humanhr to get the offer. Plus, I've added the link in the show notes so you can just click right there. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
I think union activity is generally a good thing. If there's one thing that I think we can all agree on in the U.S. With employment, it's that the U.S. is extremely business friendly and has very few protections for employees, and unions
Mm-hmm.
help sort of bridge that gap. So yeah, overall, I think it's a good thing. Um, I do think that historically unions have had a focus on job protection, and I would hope that they are evolving with the technology and realizing that let's not keep people on the assembly line, to continue that example, when when we can have robots do it. And those people, yes, that is tough for those specific individuals, but the unions can also help retrain them, re-educate them, and help them move to a different career, different industry, different type of position. And I think that that is where, again, unions can help kind of bridge that gap between the technological advancements and the job protection that unions are good for.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's there's going to be a lot of trial and error. I think with all of this, it's a lot of trial and error. There's going to be some things that go well, some things that don't go well, some mistakes. And I think overall, it's good that we're moving in this direction. I think it's good that we are taking some of these technological advancement steps. I think that it's good for people in general. I hope that we can see some additional changes, maybe to the 40-50 hour work week,
Mm-hmm.
to some additional positive changes that can give people um, a more a better life, a more leisurely life, which was the ultimate goal for even people like Henry Ford.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for gracing me with that hot seat question there. Shifting gears a little bit back to what we were initially talking about, something that struck me was your comment, and I agree with you around how some businesses might see automation as like a replacement theory that, okay, we'll automate, we're going to save all this money. And so people, we will need like one employee, maybe. I'm obviously exaggerating here, but just painting a picture, and that those companies who do think that way will likely be the ones finding themselves in hot water and having to then do this whole backpedaling thing to hire people to manage the software. Um, what would you say as a kind of like a word to these companies that maybe are thinking about automation as a replacement theory? Like, what are some ways that even listeners can maybe who might be employed by folks who think this way, how can they do an even better job of explaining the needs from a compliance perspective for keeping employees at the forefront and the core of a business in order to ensure that there aren't compliance issues or to mitigate risk?
I mean, to companies that are saying, we can replace our HR department with AI, I would say no, stop, don't do it. Absolutely not. To help persuade them, I would say you you need someone like me now to help you implement AI in your HR department, or you need someone like me after you've fired your HR department and now you have lawsuits against you because your AI software has discriminated against applicants and potentially against the people that you fired. You need me one way or the other, and the latter is going to cost a lot more. So that is where I think companies need to sort of do this cost benefit analysis and say, okay, if I'm a company who thinks I can get rid of my HR department and just use software, you can't, because you're not going to be able to oversee the software and make sure that it's acting in a compliant manner. And if you do, you'll be working 100, 120, 140, 160 hours a week and not sleeping. You have got to have people in place who can oversee the AI as it stands right now. And this is not to say that AI won't get to a point where it can be compliant and we can
Mm,
remove biases from it. I'm sure that can happen eventually, but right now it's not. And so looking at it in the near term, you have to have people on staff. And having those people on staff will also help with the morale of the entire company, because
mm-hmm.
those people, then you can shift their focus from hiring and administrative maintenance, personnel file, all that stuff that HR has to do, but let's be honest, nobody really wants to do. It's not fun. They can focus on some of those fun things. They can focus on the employee engagement. And I get questions sometimes about employee engagement, and business owners or people in department heads say, it doesn't matter if an employee is engaged. Are they doing their job? Are we getting our value out of the pay that we're giving them? And that's great. That is accurate, but employee engagement equals a productive workforce. So if you don't care about your employees' happiness, if all you care about is your company's bottom line and your company's ability to make a profit, you should still care about employee happiness and employee engagement, because study after study after study shows that employee engagement equals productivity, which equals business profit.
Hmm.
And that's where these HR people, instead of kicking them to the curb, you can reinvest in your HR department to have them focus on the employee engagement, the employee happiness factor, which will show returns. Your ROI will be positive because you will see a higher level of productivity and efficiency throughout the entire team, not just your HR department.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's so funny because I think about all of the discussion that's out there, whether from thought leaders or news anchors, whomever it might be, around why businesses are struggling to retain their teams and why businesses are struggling to turn bigger profits or profits in general. And it's so funny because you put it so perfectly, right? Like that's the message, everybody, that when your people are happy, your customers will be happy, and when your customers are happy, they spend more money. Like that's it. And it's just so funny because we hear this constant discussion around, well, how can we turn more profit, how can we retain our team? And the answer is really right there. It's the question of how do you keep your employees happy, and how do you make sure that they're engaged? And I think sometimes the answer is just an answer that a business doesn't want to hear. Whether it's I want to work remotely, whether it's I want to work wherever and whenever I want to work and I'll still be just as productive, or even if it's like I want a 10% raise. Whatever those answers might be, they vary between person to person, but I think that's probably why most businesses are still asking this same question, because they're not listening to the answer, whether because they don't like the answer or they're not listening. So it's really a very well put point. And I think what we've seen and what we've already discussed today is that all of these changes and moments of progress that we've seen thanks to automation and thanks to AI will continue to change the landscape of how we work. And it's up to us to evolve with it and to bring our employees with this whole movement so that they are continuously engaged. I mean, shifting gears even a little bit further, we see this anti-work movement as like a super trendy thing in the news, right? Like whether it's lazy girl jobs, which I've talked about on the podcast, or just anti-work in general. That I want full work-life balance, and if a company is not going to support me with that, I'm going to find a different company. And I guess I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, because I think it's really no different than anything that we've seen from other generations, where the employee is demanding a certain or maybe a different experience, and there's this confrontation between the employee and the employer. So what are your thoughts on the anti-work movement and how it relates to the evolution of the workforce?
I think yeah, I agree with you. I think it's sort of a generational thing. It comes up every few years, in some fashion. I think you hit the nail on the head that this current is not only spawned a little bit from the pandemic, what we've seen
Mm-hmm.
in the recent months at least. Obviously, there was a separate one for the actual pandemic, but what we've seen in recent months is a lot of a response to the technological advancements. Like, I don't need to be in the office 45 hours a week. If my job, sure, some jobs require, butt in seat type of work, um, but a lot of jobs don't. And so many employers, they have this strict adherence to, like, I have to see you working to know that
Mm-hmm.
you're working. Then you've hired the wrong people. Like, if you
Yeah.
can't trust me to do the job you hired me to do, then your hiring process is wrong, or I'm not the right person for the job. And I think that's sort of my response to a lot of clients that say, we need to have people in the office. We need to have that camaraderie. And absolutely, it is much easier to have that camaraderie in person. But if you're
Hmm.
using AI software properly and you're freeing up some of that administrative time for your HR team, they can focus on that remote camaraderie and they can make it work for your company.
Yeah.
Um, I think that yeah, the short answer is yes. I think it's a good thing. I think that some pushback, again, partly because of the way the system in America is set up, that there's so much bias toward corporations and not towards employees. I think this is one of the ways that employees are sort of striking back, fighting back, and saying we don't have to be in the office 45 hours a week. Maybe I don't even have to work 45 hours a week. I can make myself seem busy, but like I can get my job done in 30. So I think those are some of the advancements I think that we're seeing from technology, but I also think a shift in mindset. And I think a lot of people came out of the pandemic with that shift that I don't owe my entire or 40 years of my life to a company or to seven different companies. I want to be able to experience my life and live my life. And I think that's where a lot of this tug of war essentially is coming from.
Yeah, what a great point. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective there because I think it will just continue to be an important discussion, and it's really true that we have had kind of this reckoning because of the pandemic, but then also there's just that generational discussion that comes up. Like even with my generation, I'm a millennial. I when I left college and joined the workforce, it was all about, okay, well, how do we climb the ladder as fast as possible? And you kind of it might be because of who our parents generation or what our parents generation proselytized for us, and that there's this idea of like, okay, I'm going to work really 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 hard right now, and then maybe I'll have a fire number that's really low. Like that was the thing, like how can I retire as early as possible? And Gen Z has a bit of a different mindset, also potentially because of who their parents are. And it's like, well, I want to work. I want to have a good job. I want to get paid well, but I also don't want to miss out on life. And so it'll be really interesting to see how the future generations kind of take on this change in the workforce, and especially with the advent of technology and where technology is today. So I really, again, appreciate you taking our initial discussion around AI and software and HR and bringing us into this fold that's like super, super, super big and much bigger than just the software in HR. So thank you for that. And I would be remiss not to ask this question because I get questions from the audience all the time on education that helps them in their HR careers. And you are in a unique position where you are an attorney and you have been in HR roles. You're an HR consultant. What is your perspective on having obtained a JD and having had that level of education and being able to relate it to HR? Do you recommend it? Do you think it's necessary for everyone? What are your thoughts?
So is it necessary? No. Does it put you on top of the resume pile? Yes. And so I kind of that's sort of the short version there for listeners as to whether they go down the law school path. It definitely, I mean, I kind of fell into HR. It I didn't go to law school intending to get into HR. I like I said, I kind of fell into it, but I love it, and I'm glad that I did fall into it. It has been extremely helpful having that legal background to be able to help clients navigate some of the compliance, especially the last few years with
Hmm.
different pandemic mandates in different states, but also continuing on remote work and how you deal with having different employees in different states, some extremely red, some extremely blue, and the blue ones obviously have a little more employment protection for the
Hmm.
workers. So, how do you manage that? How do you balance that? especially on real small businesses, those with like 20, 50 employees. How do you manage that from a real small perspective when usually it's just an HR department of one or somebody who's hired for something else and said, here, also do HR. Yeah, that's kind of I mean, it definitely helps, but it's not necessary. It is it's a nice to have. I
Hmm.
think that's the way I'd put it.
Amazing. Well, thank you for answering that more personal question for us, and thank you again for joining the podcast and sharing all of not only just your insights but this perspective that is really important to think about, especially for all of us who are tasked with mitigating risk for our companies. That said, where can the listeners connect with you and learn more about not only what you do, but maybe potentially connect to learn more about their own interests, and hear more about what you do?
Sure. So I'm not a big social media person. I do have LinkedIn. I don't do much on there, but you can certainly find me on LinkedIn. My name there is Bryan, Bryan. My middle name, John, John, last name Driscoll, Driscoll. You can also find me on my website, bryanjdriscoll.com. Um, and yeah, I'm happy to talk with people. I work with both clients, business clients from startup, small business, even into international size. I have some clients that are over a few hundred employees with
Mm.
employees in different companies in different countries. I also work with individuals looking for whether it's somebody in HR looking to just brainstorm about what's next in their career path. Also helping individuals find new positions, find something that helps them with striking that work-life balance that they want, because everybody's definition is a little bit different.
Hmm.
And I think that working with people as an individual not only helps me understand what other people want, but it also helps them sort of find what's next for them and what's available and how they can transition into their next job, next career, whatever it is that they're looking for.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And for all the listeners, all of those links will be in the show notes as well. So you can connect with Bryan and potentially speak with him further, either on the business side or as the individual. Bryan, thank you so, so much again. And we'll have to have you back on one day.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.